You flooded your own yard, you idiot! Karen shrieked, her voice echoing across the cul-de-sac. Don't you dare blame us for your soggy mess! Maybe if you maintained your lawn like a normal person. She jabbed a finger toward me, her tone dripping with mockery. We wouldn't have to see that disgusting swamp every morning. Her friends snickered behind her, holding their phones up like this was some comedy special. Face it, Ethan. You brought this on yourself. One of them yelled. I didn't reply, not yet. Because a week ago, those same people had turned my perfectly leveled backyard into a muddy disaster, dumping runoff water, overloading their sprinklers and laughing as my $8,000 landscape drowned. But what Karen didn't know was that I'm Ethan Cole, a civil engineer specializing in drainage systems. I build the pipes, design the channels, and understand the water flow beneath her entire street. They wanted to play with water? Fine. I was about to show them what a real flood looks like. Karen's voice carried like a siren across the fence line. Ethan! Are you kidding me with this mess? You flooded the whole neighborhood! Her hand sliced through the air as she pointed toward my yard, which still shimmered under a thin layer of muddy water. You better fix this before it ruins our property values. I stood at the edge of my patio, still barefoot, watching the morning sunlight glint off puddles that reflected her furious expression. My dogs barked behind me, tails low, unsettled by her yelling. She wasn't always this loud. Or maybe I'd just gotten used to tuning her out, until she and her HOA clique decided that my backyard was their new playground. It started a month ago, on one of those warm Friday evenings, when the cul-de-sac gathered for their usual HOA social hour. Karen, short blonde hair, sunglasses perched like a crown, wine glass always full, led the group. She treated the neighborhood like her private estate and everyone else as her staff. And when Karen had an idea, everyone else pretended it was brilliant. That night, her idea was my backyard. Wouldn't it be fun? She said, loud enough for me to hear over the fence. If we had a water slide or something back there. Ethan's backyard has the best slope. We could run the hoses and make a splash zone for the kids. I froze mid-step. My backyard. My irrigation. My freshly graded drainage system that had taken me months to perfect. I set down my rake and called over, Karen, please don't run hoses through my property. She rolled her eyes. Oh, calm down, Ethan. We're not touching your stuff. It's just grass and water. Don't be such a grump. But the next day, I woke to the sound of laughter and running water. I stepped outside to find 2 garden hoses snaking through a gap in my back fence, spraying water downhill into my yard. Kids in swimsuits slid across the mud as Karen stood on her deck, filming it all like it was a commercial. Karen! I shouted. Turn it off! Now! She waved me off, shouting over the laughter. Relax, it's just water. It's not like your precious little yard can't handle a few puddles. A few puddles? The ground was drenched, water pooling near the retaining wall. My drainage system wasn't built for this kind of abuse, not from intentional flooding. I yanked the hoses free and threw them back over the fence. Her voice sharpened instantly. You touch my stuff again, Ethan, and I'll report you to the HOA. This is community property. It's my backyard, I snapped. Not according to the board, she shot back, jabbing a finger toward the HOA office across the street. You think you're above the rules just because you're some kind of engineer? That word hit differently. Because yes, I was an engineer, a civil one. And while she mocked it, she had no idea what that meant. I'd designed drainage systems for entire subdivisions. I knew how water moved, how it obeyed no one but physics. And right now, physics was on my side. For the next week, Karen's fun continued. Every evening, she and her friends gathered near the fence, dumping buckets, rerouting hoses, letting their runoff spill directly downhill into my property. My grass turned to swamp, my soil eroded, and mosquitoes multiplied like a curse. I filed complaints. The HOA ignored them. I set up barriers, they knocked them down. I replaced the fence panel. Karen called it vandalism and made me remove it. Then came the final straw. I came home late one night to find water still flowing, her backyard lights glowing, hoses running full blast into mine. My shed door was open, my tools muddy, my blueprints ruined, and there she was, standing in the glow of her patio lights with a smug smile. Oops, she said, twirling the hose nozzle in her hand. Guess it overflowed again. You really should get better drainage, Ethan. That's when something in me shifted. The anger quieted, condensed, and became focus. Because she was right about one thing. I did need better drainage, but what she didn't realize was that I could design perfect drainage, and I could make sure every drop of it led right back to where it belonged, her side of the fence. Karen's laughter still echoed in my head that night. I'd spent hours cleaning mud, unclogging the drains, and digging shallow trenches to keep the water from reaching my patio again. But every time I looked up toward her yard, I saw the faint shimmer of water trickling down my slope. Intentional, steady, relentless. She wasn't just careless. She was doing it on purpose. The next morning, I caught her in the act. She stood there, hair tied up messily, barking orders to her friends like a foreman on a construction site. "Just keep it running for a while," she said, smirking when she noticed me filming. "Oh, don't look so serious, Ethan. It's just water." I walked closer to the fence. "Water doesn't just disappear, Karen. It has to go somewhere. And right now, that somewhere is my yard." She shrugged, crossing her arms. "Maybe you should have bought a better lot, sweetheart. I told the HOA about your flooding issue. They said it's your problem now. So unless you want to keep whining, I'd suggest investing in some sandbags." That was it. The HOA had her back. She had the neighbors laughing. And I was the overreacting homeowner in their little group chat. But she had no idea what I really did for a living. That evening, I went down into my workshop, a place most people would mistake for a small-scale engineering lab. Pipes, pumps, flow meters, soil samplers, everything was there. I'd built systems for entire neighborhoods. Now I was about to design one for a single backyard. I pulled out the blueprints of our subdivision, the stormwater runoff map, the gradient angles, the catch basin placements. Karen's property sat right above mine, and the street in front of her house drained directly into the same line I could access from my maintenance valve. "Oh, Karen," I muttered, tracing the slope with my pen. "You want to play with water? Let's play." By midnight, I'd rigged the first section, a small bypass pipe under my retaining wall leading straight into the storm drain network. I wasn't flooding her yet, not even close, but I wanted to know how much water it would take to push the system to its limit. When I stepped outside, the moon reflected off my soggy yard like a mirror. I glanced at her house. Lights off, sprinkler timer blinking red. She had no idea she'd just started a war with an engineer. The next morning, while the neighborhood still slept under the soft hum of sprinklers, I was already knee-deep in mud, sketching plans on my workbench. The smell of wet soil mixed with engine grease and old coffee, the scent of something poetic in motion. Karen thought I was some average homeowner. She didn't know I was the guy cities called when their storm drains collapsed. I unrolled the original HOA drainage layout, the one I designed 2 years before I bought this property. Ironically, I knew every underground connection, every flow direction, and every point of failure beneath this street. Their stormwater pipes ran right behind my property line, and with a few precise adjustments, I could change the way gravity worked for this entire block. All I needed were 3 things: a diversion valve, a buried conduit, and an untraceable outlet. That afternoon, while Karen was out gossiping by the clubhouse, I worked quietly in the back corner of my yard. My dog, Rusty, watched curiously as I buried a new line under the flower beds, one that would redirect excess flow from the neighborhood's main runoff basin. Every twist of the wrench felt like justice, tightening its grip. "Hey, Ethan!" called Tom, Karen's husband, leaning over his fence. "What's all that digging? You planning on building an underground pool?" I smiled politely. "Something like that. Just improving drainage. Wouldn't want another flood, right?" He chuckled, oblivious. "Good luck fixing that mess. Karen says you should just move out if you can't handle a little water." "Tell her I'm working on it," I said, burying the last pipe with a satisfying thud. By sunset, the system was nearly complete. All it needed was the final connection, a hidden valve that could redirect an entire block's worth of sprinkler runoff straight down Karen's precious street. That night, as the cul-de-sac lights flickered on, I stood in my yard and looked toward her home. From my vantage point, I could see the faint glow of her porch lights, the perfect reflection of entitlement in architectural form. Rusty barked once, almost as if to say, "She won't see it coming." I placed my hand on the control lever and whispered, "Neither will the HOA." The next morning, rain clouds rolled in. Unplanned, poetic timing. I left the system sealed, waiting. Every drop that fell into the gutters now filled my new channels, primed like a loaded spring. By evening, Karen returned from her spin class, stepped out of her SUV, and frowned. The street in front of her driveway shimmered slightly, puddles where there had never been any before. She pointed at me across the road, shouting, "Hey! Your stupid pipes are leaking again!" I pretended to look confused. "That's odd. Must be runoff from uphill." She huffed, hands on hips, and stormed back into her house. What she didn't realize, not yet, was that the next rainfall would make her entire street look like Venice. And when that happened, she'd remember the man whose backyard she turned into a swamp, and she'd finally understand, you don't mess with someone who designs the flood. The rain came down harder than I could have prayed for, a steady, thundering downpour that turned the cul-de-sac into a mirror of light and movement. The gutters overflowed, the lawns glistened, and every drop that hit my roof was another ounce of momentum for what was about to happen. Rusty barked nervously at the window as thunder rumbled in the distance. I gave his head a pat. "Easy, boy. It's time." The hidden drainage lever sat behind the shed, disguised as part of an irrigation control box. When I opened it, a faint hiss of pressure escaped, the sound of power being redirected. I rotated the valve slowly, and deep beneath the soil, water began to shift direction. Every inch of flow that should have gone downhill toward the retention basin now fed straight into the cul-de-sac's main storm line, which ran directly under Karen's street. The timing was perfect. Nature did half the work. I just gave her a little nudge. By mid-afternoon, small puddles had formed along the curbs. Nothing alarming yet. But I could see Karen's car tires splashing through a thin layer of water as she pulled into her driveway. Her annoyed face was already a sight worth remembering. She stormed out of her car, umbrella snapping open like a weapon. "Ethan, you better come look at this!" she shouted across the street, waving her phone. I stepped outside calmly, letting the rain soak into my jacket. "Something wrong?" "My street is flooding," she barked. "You've got some kind of leak or something from your stupid drainage system." "This is your fault!" I tilted my head. "Karen, this is just runoff. Maybe check with the HOA?" Her nostrils flared. "Don't you dare mock me. You think I don't know what you're doing? You're sabotaging the neighborhood, trying to get back at us for that little puddle in your backyard." I let a small grin slip. "Karen, if you think this is sabotage..." I looked around at the rising water. "Then you haven't seen anything yet," she gasped, caught off guard by my calmness. "What's that supposed to mean?" Before I could answer, the storm drains began to gurgle, deep, hollow, metallic sounds of air being forced out by rushing water. Karen's eyes darted down as water surged from the grates, spilling over the curbs. Within seconds, her driveway was submerged halfway. "Tom! Tom!" she screamed toward her front door. "Get towels! Get sandbags! Do something!" Her husband came running out in a panic, holding a bucket. "What did you do, Ethan?" I shrugged. Just watching nature run its course. Cars slowed at the end of the street, tires slicing through the deepening flow. Water glimmered under the headlights, turning the entire cul-de-sac into a shallow river. And right at the center, Karen stood on her flooded driveway, her designer shoes sinking into the water she once mocked me for. She pointed at me again, shouting over the rain, "I'll have you arrested for this." "Oh, you'll have to wait till the cops can get here," I said, looking down the road where a police cruiser idled, unable to move past the rising current. By now, water had begun lapping at Karen's front steps. She looked around in disbelief. The same people who once laughed with her were now dragging their trash cans out of the water, cursing under their breath. I turned to head back inside. Rusty barked once, tail wagging as if he knew justice had finally begun flowing downstream. Behind me, Karen shouted my name one last time, her voice cracking under the sound of rushing water and thunder. But I didn't look back, because this was only the beginning. By sunrise, the street looked like a war zone between man and water. The rain hadn't stopped overnight. If anything, it came down harder. The cul-de-sac was officially a pond. Cars sat half-submerged, mailboxes leaned sideways, and the reflection of the streetlights rippled across what used to be Karen's perfectly paved driveway. I stood at my window, sipping black coffee as Rusty leaned on my leg, tail wagging lazily. "Looks like the system's performing beautifully," I muttered. The engineer in me was proud. The homeowner in me was vindicated. The man in me? He was just getting started. Karen's shrill voice carried over the rain like a fire alarm. "Ethan, open your door right now!" I didn't move. I watched her from the window. She was ankle-deep in murky water, hair plastered to her face, holding her precious clipboard above her head like a trophy of authority that no longer mattered. "You think this is funny?" she screamed. "You've destroyed our entire neighborhood. The HOA's insurance won't cover this. You're going to pay for every penny of this disaster." Behind her, Tom was pushing a broom, trying to redirect water that simply wouldn't go anywhere. Their luxury SUV sat useless, the wheels completely underwater. I stepped outside finally, raincoat zipped, calm as ever. "Karen," I said over the downpour, "you might want to talk to the drainage committee about that." She froze mid-yell. "The what?" "The same committee that voted to reroute the runoff through my property line last year. Remember that? The one you chaired?" Her jaw dropped, realization dawning for the first time. "You mean," she stammered, This is from our system?" I nodded slowly. "You wanted convenience. You got it." Thunder rolled in like a laugh from the heavens themselves. Behind us, a police cruiser had finally made it through the deeper section of the street. 2 officers stepped out, splashing through ankle-deep water. One called out, "Who's responsible for this flooding?" Karen instantly pointed at me. "Him! It's his fault! He tampered with city property. Arrest him!" The younger officer frowned, glancing down at a tablet. "Ma'am, according to the report, the drainage layout was approved and signed off by a—" "Ethan Cole?" I raised a brow. "That's me," the officer nodded. "Then you're technically in charge of maintaining the backup systems for this block. Everything here is functioning within design tolerances, actually. Just overcapacity from runoff. Happens in bad weather." Karen's mouth fell open. "You're saying this is legal?" The cop shrugged. "Not illegal, ma'am, just unfortunate." Tom groaned, rubbing his temples. "Karen, please, just stop." But she didn't. She spun toward me again, fury returning like fire from waterlogged ashes. "You smug, manipulative—" "Careful," I said, stepping closer. "You're in enough deep water already." Rusty barked behind me, startling her. She stumbled, losing her balance, and splashed backward into the flood. Her clipboard floated away like a little raft of lost power. For a moment, time froze. Even the rain seemed to pause, just long enough for her to glare up at me through the water. "You'll regret this, Ethan Cole," she sputtered. I tilted my head slightly. "No, Karen, you will." As I walked back to my porch, the reflection of police lights danced on the rising current, painting the scene in flashing blue and red. Karen's empire of rules had drowned, literally, under the weight of her own arrogance, and I had just gotten started turning the tide. By the next morning, the entire HOA board had assembled like panicked generals after losing a battle. They gathered under a cluster of umbrellas in the middle of the flooded street, staring at the chaos that was once their pristine neighborhood. Karen stood at the center, arms crossed, hair frizzed from humidity and humiliation. Her shoes made a disgusting squelch every time she shifted her weight, but she didn't care. Her pride had taken the real beating. Ethan watched from his porch again, this time without his coffee. Just quiet satisfaction. Rusty sat loyally at his side, tail swishing in the puddles. "All right," barked a short, balding man named Jeff, the HOA treasurer. "We've got reports of water damage to 7 driveways, 2 basements, and someone's retaining wall collapsing." "That'd be my retaining wall," shouted one of the neighbors. "You said rerouting the runoff through Ethan's property would prevent this exact thing." Karen clenched her fists. "It was a temporary solution. Ethan's system must have failed. He must have sabotaged something." All eyes turned toward Ethan. He sighed, walked down from the porch, and waded through the shin-deep water, calm and collected. His expression carried that unnerving mix of pity and control, the look of a man who'd already run the calculations. Sabotage? Ethan repeated. Karen, you signed off on the stormwater revision. You voted for the cheap PVC instead of reinforced steel. You even bragged about saving $3,200 at last year's HOA meeting, the group murmured. Someone whispered, She did say that. Karen's face flushed. You can't prove that. Ethan smiled faintly and held up his phone. Actually, I can. Meeting minutes. Recorded audio. HOA transparency policy, remember? You made sure every decision had to be documented. It's public record. The crowd's expressions shifted, sympathy melting into frustration. A woman in a soaked sundress spoke up. Karen, this whole mess is because you wanted that stupid fountain installed at the cul-de-sac. That reroute came from you. Yeah, another man yelled. My garage is flooded because of your little aesthetic improvement. Karen spun around in disbelief. You're all turning on me? I run this neighborhood. Jeff slammed his clipboard shut. Not anymore, you don't. That was when Ethan stepped forward. Actually, he said, tone mild but cutting, you never really ran anything. You just like the feeling of control. Real leadership means responsibility. Something you've avoided since day one. Her voice cracked. You think you're the hero in this? Ethan looked past her, scanning the rising water, the stranded cars, the exhausted neighbors trying to salvage what they could. No, Karen, I'm not a hero. I just gave the water a path, one that you designed. Her jaw trembled, but she stayed silent this time. Jeff cleared his throat. We'll be holding an emergency meeting tonight to reassign HOA leadership. Karen turned white. You can't do that. I am the president. Was, Jeff corrected. Effective immediately. You're suspended pending review. The group began dispersing, muttering, shaking their heads, trudging through the mess. The HOA empire Karen had built on intimidation and fake smiles was crumbling faster than her flower beds. Ethan started walking back to his house, but Karen's voice rose again, desperate now. You'll pay for this! You'll regret ever crossing me! He stopped mid-step, rain still dripping from his hair, and glanced back over his shoulder. No, he said quietly, I already did. Every day you made my life miserable. This, he gestured toward the flooded street, the chaos, the ruin of her control. This is just gravity taking its course. For a long moment, no one said a word. The rain lightened. The sun tried to break through the clouds, and the water shimmered like a mirror. Karen stood alone in the middle of it all, clutching her ruined clipboard, watching her power literally wash away. Rusty barked once, sharp, almost like punctuation, as Ethan disappeared into his house. And for the first time since he'd moved in, the neighborhood felt quiet, peaceful. By the time the sun fully returned, the cul-de-sac looked like something out of a disaster film. The asphalt shimmered with puddles, lawns were streaked with mud, and pieces of Karen's ornamental fence floated lazily down what used to be Maplewood Lane. Ethan didn't gloat. He didn't need to. The water had spoken louder than any revenge could. A few days later, the cleanup began. Crews arrived with pumps, hoses, and sandbags, muttering curses as they traced the flow. Back to the original drainage line, the one Karen had insisted be rerouted for her beautification project. It turned out her precious fountain had blocked a secondary overflow channel. When Ethan's modifications redirected the excess, it followed the natural gradient, straight through her yard and onto the street. Poetic symmetry, Ethan thought. Nature had simply restored balance. Karen, on the other hand, wasn't ready to surrender. She stormed onto Ethan's porch, soaked but furious, slamming her muddy hand against his door. You ruined everything, she screamed. My car, my driveway, my reputation. Ethan opened the door slowly, expression calm but unreadable. Rusty stood beside him, fur bristled slightly. Karen, he said, voice low and measured, you flooded my yard. You called the city on me. You mocked me in front of everyone. I didn't ruin anything. You just never understood that actions have consequences. She jabbed a trembling finger toward him. You think this makes you some kind of hero? You embarrassed me. You humiliated me. He tilted his head slightly. Funny. That's exactly how you made me feel for months. Karen's eyes flickered, a rare moment of hesitation. You're heartless. No, he replied, stepping forward just enough for her to feel his presence. I'm precise. For a second, they stood in silence. The sound of distant pumps hummed from the end of the street. Then Karen spun around and stormed off, splashing through ankle-deep puddles, muttering something about lawsuits and revenge. But her voice trembled now. Less venom, more fear. Over the next week, the HOA descended into chaos. Karen's suspension turned permanent after photos and footage of the Great Maplewood flood circulated online. A neighbor's teen had posted a video titled, HOA Karen Gets Washed Away by Karma, and within days, it racked up hundreds of thousands of views. Her influence vanished overnight. The same people who once bowed to her now avoided her entirely. Some even laughed when she passed by. Ethan, meanwhile, was approached by Jeff, the same treasurer who'd once stayed silent during Karen's reign. We'd like you to take over the drainage committee, Jeff said awkwardly, hat in hand. Seems like you've got a good understanding of how things should work. Ethan smiled faintly. I'll think about it. He didn't want power. He just wanted peace, something he hadn't had in years. A month later, the neighborhood finally dried. The lawns grew back greener than before, helped by the new irrigation designs Ethan suggested. Proper, efficient, safe. Karen's house, though, still bore scars. The lower half of her garage door was warped, her driveway cracked, and her prized garden fountain was gone, dismantled by order of the city for blocking public drainage. Every morning, Ethan walked Rusty past her house. He didn't gloat or smirk, but sometimes he'd catch her staring out from behind her blinds, eyes hollow, expression haunted. One morning, she opened her door as he passed. You win, she said softly, voice stripped of arrogance. He stopped. There was never supposed to be a winner, Karen. Only lessons. She looked down, lips trembling. Well, consider me taught. He nodded once and walked away. As Rusty trotted beside him, Ethan glanced back at the street that once turned into a river. The asphalt was clean now, the curbs dry, but in his mind's eye, he could still see the reflection of Karen's panic shimmering on the floodwater. Some floods leave behind destruction, others clarity, and Maplewood Lane, once ruled by arrogance, finally found both. Ethan smiled quietly to himself. Water always finds its way, he murmured. Rusty barked in agreement. The sun broke through the clouds again, scattering light across the peaceful neighborhood, one that had finally learned how dangerous it could be to mess with the flow. Karen thought drowning my backyard was just a prank, but she never imagined I'd turn her entire street into a river. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just let gravity and a few pipes do the talking. Now every rainfall reminds her of that mistake. Water rushing past her driveway, a permanent echo of her arrogance. Me? I just sip my coffee, watch the flow, and smile. Because karma doesn't always knock. Sometimes it floods.